with all the speculation around the Chicago Bulls and who they could be trading, what the next form of the roster is going to look like, the Bulls, one thing that's been consistent is that the Bulls remain hesitant to trade Alex Caruso. Per a new article from Casey Johnson, that still seems to be the case. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about reportedly the Knicks not really being interested in Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, and we're going to preview tonight's game against the San Antonio Spurs. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every single social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the content for today. So I want to start off with this article from Casey Johnson. He wrote on NBC Sports Chicago, and he says that the Bulls have been hesitant to discuss deals involving Alex Caruso at this point because he's arguably the regime's greatest success story, and he is a perfect embodiment of the culture the franchise wants to project. And so, now he does point out as well, Casey Johnson, that things can change between now and, the next 2 months where the trade deadline is February 8th, especially if the Bulls get a big offer for Alex Caruso. He could be a very sought-out player at that trade deadline, and the Bulls may very well get an offer that they just can't pass up. But I want to talk about why, I go back and forth on this. Me and Pat, the designer over on Locked on Bulls, have had a couple of discussions actually about this, with Alex Caruso, and he's very much on the point of he doesn't want to see the Bulls trade Alex Caruso. He thinks Alex Caruso is important, for the culture building, things like that. And it's not to say that I disagree with that. I do understand what and how Alex Caruso can affect building a culture here in Chicago, especially as we look to move forward into the next phase of the roster with like ball movement, player movement, everybody kind of getting touches, unselfish defensive intensity. Alex Caruso brings all of those things. But the thing that I think kind of makes it a big deal for me is that you want to look at the future, right? And Alex Caruso, if he is, which, going into next offseason when he does become a free agent, not this upcoming offseason, the offseason after, at that point, he'll be about to turn 31 years old, and he could very well look to ring chase, which, the Bulls are probably not going to be in a situation where that is the most conducive thing for him. And so the Bulls do have to play some type of risk versus reward, right? Like, yes, Alex Caruso is huge for culture building, and one could say maybe over the next, the rest of this season, all of next season, even if he does leave in the offseason, you can let him ride off into the sunset, let him go chase titles and appreciate the way that maybe he helped these young players learn over this next year and a half. But you also don't want to pass up an opportunity, to me, to add future assets, especially if you can get a first, or God forbid, 2 firsts, even if one's heavily protected, things like that. For a player like Alex Caruso, when your team is so far away from being anything close to a contender for an actual NBA championship. Now, could they compete for playoff or play-in spots? That remains to be seen on how this team is going to continue to develop and what they do eventually get back in a Zach LaVine type move or whatever else. But, the last thing that I think the Bulls should be in is a position where you have a player that you can't get assets back for, and you just don't make that move. That's kind of, one thing with this Bulls team is that they have always kind of been a year behind the curve, right? A year behind right now, even in, the shopping of Zach LaVine, kind of a year now behind that value being as high as what it's going to be. With DeMar DeRozan, they find themselves in a similar situation, right? Nobody knows what the future holds for DeMar, but the trade market may be much less for DeMar than what it would have been a year ago just because he's an expiring contract. So the Bulls really have to look at those type of things. I understand what Alex Caruso can mean. And if you can lock in Alex Caruso to a contract extension, this upcoming summer, which he would be eligible for a contract extension at that point, if you can lock him up for a contract extension in the offseason, cool. If the Bulls feel confident in where they stand with Alex Caruso and conversations that they've had, where he sits with the team, that they're going to be able to lock him in to maybe a 3-year extension on the end of that deal, which would put him here for another 4 years, cool. Then at that point in time, you keep him in. He could be a culture piece depending on what that contract is going to be. But if you have any fear, any inclination, any inkling that Alex Caruso may very well walk at the end of this contract to go to a team that he can compete for a title on, to me, you're doing a disservice to the future of your team to then not look and explore what that market is and what you can get back for him now. And not even just now, but like I said, Alex Caruso's value is going to be high regardless. I think even if the Bulls do look and wait to move him, maybe even at the draft, right, to kind of move up in the draft if they need to or something like that, which I don't really think this is the type of draft where you move up in, but I'm just throwing out theoreticals. That the value would still be there, right, to a degree. Alex Caruso is one of the most cost-effective type contracts that you could get a player on, especially per his production and how he stepped up his offensive game this season. So, you have those aspects of it to really look at as well. But I look at it and say this, like, I love Caruso. To me, he's the type of player that we love here in Chicago. He's a dog. The way that he's increased that three-point shooting, he talked about it in the offseason. And once the season started, we saw that, no, it wasn't just talk. This is a reality. This guy is averaging one of the best three-point shooting percentages in the league right now. And so, those things are all valid and they're all true. And those are all things that you want towards the team, even if you go younger, you go, retool, rebuild, whatever it is. That's something that, the way that he works, the work ethic, right? The way that he competes, the way that he sacrifices for his team, that is absolutely a culture that you want on this team wholeheartedly. Do not get me wrong on that. But you also, at this point in time, are still a team that's really searching to get the most bites at the apple at talent that you can add to this team that's going to help pay off and increase this ceiling in the future. So you really have to kind of monitor it and go both ways with it. The last thing you want to do is be left out when you could have gotten some assets back, some value back, and then he ends up walking for nothing. So, the Bulls got to play that. That's on the front office. As I've been saying all season, I don't envy the place this front office is now. It's in large part of their own doing. So, they've created this, so they got to figure out a way to get out of it. But, Alex Caruso is a special player, and I know the Bulls fans love him. I love him. But, I mean, when you go and you're trying to fix something that has gone completely left, sometimes you gotta send off pieces that you like to get some future assets and hope that you get those whatever deal you make with those assets, you make the right decisions there. So we'll end up seeing what the future holds for Alex Caruso in the Chicago Bulls jersey. Either way, like I said, never going to be mad at Alex Caruso being on the team. Never. But with that said, let's go ahead and move on. So one of the teams that have been kind of rumored around the Bulls, Zach LaVine, there's been some interest going back for like 2 years. They've been reportedly interested in Zach LaVine. They were a team that was listed on DeMar DeRozan's preferred teams to go to list as well if he is traded, not necessarily a trade request, but if he was traded. Well, according to Ian Begley, the Knicks have not engaged in advanced talks with the Chicago Bulls on potential trades for either Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan. Now, advanced talks is the key word of that. It does not mean that they have not made calls. It just means that outside of maybe those preliminary talks on, hey, what would it take for us to get DeMar here? What would it take for us to get Zach? Or would you be interested in this and potential Zach? No, okay. Well, we'll go back with it. Like, so, those happen more than what I think fans realize. There are a lot of exploratory talks that happen, or at least just calls that fillers that go out from GMs all throughout the season. We'll never hear about 99.99% of them. The parts that we hear are the very minuscule parts of it. So that really doesn't surprise me. But then Philip Martinez actually added to this as well, saying that, the Knicks have expressed interest in Zach LaVine in recent years. But, again, it comes down to that value. And right now, the Knicks being fifth in the Eastern Conference, they sit at 12-8 on the season. They are a team that looks like they are going to be a playoff team. But as we know with the Knicks, they're always looking for something to kind of get them over the top. Now, you have the reigning Eastern Conference Player of the Week in Julius Randle down there. You got Jalen Brunson, who as fans of just the game of basketball, the NBA in general, we need to be talking about Jalen Brunson more and what he does. You guys know I hate the New York Knicks. Not that I hate any player on that roster, really. I just hate the franchise. I hate the Knicks. It's ingrained in me as a Bulls fan going back to the 90s, so it just is what it is there. But Jalen Brunson is a dog, and I'm sure they're looking at what they got in Jalen Brunson for a deal that a lot of people thought may have been an overpay, and they're trying to make sure that they can add the most assets around that as they try to build a team going forward that is going to be, a dog. And so right now, the New York Knicks may, are probably in this evaluation mode of, hey, we're playing really well right now. 12-8. Now, it's not like they're world beaters, anything like that, but they're playing really well. You got Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle are averaging over 20 points per game. You got RJ Barrett not too far off from them, right around 19 points per game. And you got Quickly averaging 15 points a game coming off the bench for them as well. But they may be looking for something to kind of get them over the top. What is a good pairing for them? And, the thing is, and because they would be looking to add to the team, I know a lot of Bulls fans have thought, well, could we get Quickly back if we sent DeMar? I don't know if that's going to be the case, right? Like, I get it. Quickly's a scorer coming off the bench for them, and he plays still 24 minutes per game. This is a guy who's 6'2", 190 pounds. Is just listen, as undersized shooting guard, he can still absolutely fill up the stat sheet. And the thing about the Knicks is they have contracts they could absolutely use to get in any type of deal. But the fact that it's not in advanced talks kind of makes sense to me as well with where the team sits right now. They may very well be willing to say, hey, rather than us give up some of these young guys and assets for any deal, regardless of what it is, maybe we look and say, hey, let's just keep this team going. Maybe we can add something organically to this team, maybe in the offseason, something like that. Yeah, at that point, you risk the chance of maybe a player falling off or something like that. But injury, every year the risk for injury goes up around. But, the Knicks kind of not really getting in those advanced talks makes sense. And again, like we said before, too, like you're not really going to get very many advanced talks anyway before December 15th. Then maybe even further than that, January 15th. And the Knicks are going to be a team as well that are exploring other options than just what the Chicago Bulls have. They could be looking at the Toronto Raptors, which could be another team looking to kind of break up some of what's going on with that roster. There's some other rosters in the NBA that could do that as well. But I think the Knicks are going to be one of those teams that kind of sit back and kind of wait on the first domino to fall, right? If a team at the trade deadline or near that trade deadline approaching that makes a big move that kind of ups where they expected to be in those standings, you could see the Knicks go ahead and pull the trigger on a move. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be for either one of the Chicago Bulls players, but you could see the Knicks do that. So hearing that advanced talks haven't happened right now, it's not really too surprising to me, even with their reported interest over the last few years in Zach LaVine. But hey, let me know what you guys think on that down below as always. But before we go today, we do have a game today against the San Antonio Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs are one of the, coached by Greg Popovich, a legend in this game. And while the Spurs only have 3 wins, I think, on the season so far, this is not a team that you want to overlook because, listen, you're the Chicago Bulls. And while you have been playing much better over this stretch, listen, you had some trouble with the Charlotte Hornets in that. And you don't want to be outcoached completely by the San Antonio Spurs. Now, one thing with the Spurs, yeah, their offensive numbers don't jump out the stat sheet at you. They're middle of the pack as far as three-point shooting attempts, middle of the pack of field goal percentage, middle of the pack of points per game. But one thing that they do have that's elite is their third team in assists, and they have Victor Wembanyama. So that's another thing that you got to look there with the San Antonio Spurs. And they're a team that also just made a change and finally moving Jeremy Sohan out of that starting point guard position, try to start doing some different things there for them as well. And so, listen, it's going to be a treat to be able to see Wemby play against the Chicago Bulls team. They don't have a single 20-point per game scorer either, right? They got 2 players averaging 18 in Devin Vassell and Wemby in that, but then Keldon Johnson averaging 16. You got Zach Collins, Jeremy Sohan, all their players averaging double-digit scoring attempts. But this team is so well coached that I don't think you really want to overlook this team just because of their record. They can come in here and they can get like I said, it's Greg Popovich, right? You always want to look at Greg Popovich. He's always going to be a threat to beat any coach that's in front of him, regardless of the roster that he has, because he's just that damn good of a head coach in the NBA. So, the Bulls, things stay the same with them. And I know I've been saying that now for a while with the Chicago Bulls team. It's the execution and intensity defensively, right? Going after loose balls, going after the rebounds. If the Bulls can win the rebounding battle against this team, again, that puts them in the best situations that we know this team has been thriving at with the recent play from this team. They can get out in transition. Players like Kobe White, Ayo, Patrick Williams when he's playing really well, Alex Caruso, all thrive in that. We don't know if Alex Caruso's playing or not. We haven't really gotten an update on that either, which, yeah, that's a little bit concerning if I'm just being 100% honest with you with, I just want the Bulls to just be kind of forthcoming on this Alex Caruso thing. We know he got dinged up pretty bad there. So, I wouldn't be surprised. But, this Spurs team is not, the stats don't jump out the sheet at you. So it's not one of those things where I'm going to be like, hey, look at this stat that they have, or this stat points to this, or this stat points to that. But it comes down to the Bulls and the competition. Can the Bulls come in and get back to executing? And one thing that we saw in the last game that was concerning is kind of getting back to watching DeMar DeRozan get to work. That's not where this Bulls team is best at. They're not best at when they're watching other players get back to work. And it wasn't isolation ball. A lot of people go immediately to saying it was isolation. No, it's just players moving without the ball. We have to move without the ball. We have to move without the ball. So if we can do that, move without the ball, spread the ball around, limit turnovers while getting turnovers ourselves, getting into that, getting into transition basketball, again, pushing the pace when it matters, not just pushing the pace to run and gun, but pushing the pace when you get those defensive rebounds, when you force those turnovers, when you go after those loose balls. Those are times where you want to push the ball in transition, and that's when the Bulls are the most dangerous at. Alex Caruso and Torrey Craig are both listed as probable for this game, but so there you have that. Expect the starting lineup to stay the same. Patrick Williams, who, last game didn't really take a whole hell of a lot of shots, but still did a lot of things outside of that in the game of basketball that made him, have an impact on that game. But the Vooch matchup, Vooch against Wemby is going to be something that I'm extremely, watching to see how Vooch goes against this modern day big when he's put up against him. Otherwise, we could see a lot of Patrick Williams on Wemby, as well as, the San Antonio Spurs have been starting Wemby at power forward and Zach Collins at center. So, seeing Patrick Williams and what him and Torrey Craig are able to do against Wemby in this game, going to be exciting to see that, Matt, that part of the matchup as well. So, a fun, exciting game that I expect us to get from the Chicago Bulls today. Hopefully they come in, hopefully they execute, and hopefully we get back to that kind of grit and style of play that we've been seeing from the Chicago Bulls team, the 2 games prior to the last game, even though still got to win. And that was the important part of it. They got the win. But can the Bulls get a dub again tonight against the San Antonio Spurs? Let's hope so. But let me know your thoughts and predictions down below if you're on the YouTube side. If you're on the podcast side, I'll tell you guys how to get your thoughts in here in a second. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so is 773-270-2799. This is all also in the description of every video or podcast if you're on the podcast side, so you guys can get that information there. But like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.